When you run a performance test, you want to monitor the systems that are under test. You want to keep an eye on the CPU, the disk, the memory, database, all sorts of other things possible. RPT will monitor various system metrics for you during a run, and I'm going to go over how to set that up. It'll monitor all resources available to Windows perfmon, but you need to know the ID and the password of the monitored system. And it will monitor all resources available to Unix's rstat-d. rstat-d needs to be enabled on your Unix systems, and the way that you do that is different on different versions of Unix, so read the documentation. But you need to have the firewall unblocked on the rstat-d port, and there are various other resources that it'll let you monitor. The collected data is shown on the resource tab of the run result, and you can add those measures to custom reports. Monitoring system resources is really required to know what's going on in a performance run. You can't tell if you're near capacity if you're not monitoring it. You can't tell where bottlenecks are. If there's any unexpected activity, monitoring the resources might show you that. And it's a good idea to monitor all the systems that are under test and at least one RPT agent. So I'm going to take you through what it takes to set that up. So now I'm on a schedule, and you go to the Resource Monitoring tab and you enable Resource Monitoring. It shows you this dialog, and you say Add. And since I have no resources yet, I have to create a new one. So that's what I'm doing here. And the first thing you do is you give it a name. And then you pick which resource you want to monitor. This is a Windows machine, so it's Windows Performance Monitor. And you need the ID and password, as I said. And it's not a bad idea to say save the password here. That way you don't have to enter it each time you do a run. And then it shows you the resources that it's monitoring. And one thing to watch out for is that by default it shows you only the selected resource counters. And if you're picking new resources that you want to monitor, you want to say show all of them, whether they're being monitored or not. And as you can see, there are bunches of metrics that you can monitor from Windows. It's anything available to Windows perfmon. So usually you look at memory, you look at disk, you look at network, look at CPU. You have to choose what you want to monitor. Lots are available. You say next once you've chosen that, and now you're choosing where you want to store the locations, and typically I store them under locations. Then I'll add another resource. And actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another resource to monitor under Panther, and there's an HTTP server there. So I'm going to pick Apache HTTP server, and I have it set up to be monitored on port 80. But I don't have the system up and running. I don't have Apache up and running, so it gives me this error message. So I'm going to go and start Apache now in the background. And I'll come back and do this later once Apache is started. In the meantime, let me add a Unix rstat-d performance counter. I'm going to create a new one. And it is, give it a name. And it's Unix. I'll just use the default port, but you have to unblock the firewall on that port. And it shows you the available counters, but it's only showing the selected ones once again. So watch out for this and uncheck that and show all the counters when you're making this selection, because otherwise it won't show you all of them. And different Unix systems will make different counters available from rstat-d. Then I'm going to save it again. I'm going to save it under locations. And I say finish. And now those two systems will be monitored. And it's worth mentioning that RPT-VM01 is actually an RPT agent. And so I'm monitoring an agent. So okay, so now I'm going to edit the existing one. I've started Apache in the background. And I'm going to pick Apache on that Windows system. Before I do that, let me just point out you can monitor Tomcat, DB2, some Tivoli. You can monitor WebSphere PMI monitoring, which lets you get inside the JVM and see certain things. We'll point out if you enable that, it takes about 5% CPUs at the WebSphere server, so you take that into account. So now port 80 on the HTTP server, and I'm just going to select all of them. So I will be monitoring the HTTP server and Windows Performance Monitor against that system. So that's what it takes to set up performance monitoring on Windows and Unix. To set up HTTP server monitoring, you have to do a couple of things. You have to have mod status enabled, load module mod status in httpd.com is where you set this. And you can set extended status, it gives you a couple other metrics that's not really required. And then you have to enable server status so that it will allow folks to request it. And finally, if you have caching enabled on that HTTP server, you don't want this page to be cached. So I have to set server status to make sure it does not cache the HTTP request that shows the server status. Otherwise, you just always see that there's one user running a request instead of the current information. And after you do a run, you get a report on the resources tab of the default report, and it shows you the various metrics. And they look like this, and you have to scroll through them, and you can filter them, and you can export them, and you can put them on other pages as well. So in summary, RPT will monitor various system metrics during a run, Windows and Unix, and other resources as well. And the collected data is shown on the Resource tab of Run Results. And it's really required to monitor system metrics in order to do valid performance testing, so that the performance testing will tell you what you need to know.